Thank you. I think to go back to the question, the link between COVID and climate, I think there are 4 critical areas where I'm extremely pessimistic of the consequence of COVID on climate discussion. First, with the COVID crisis, we discovered the extreme distrust versus science with fraction of the population, which is even more surprising because it's in Europe where people are in general more educated than in other parts. Second, distrust versus politicians. When politicians ask us to do things, we were people didn't believe them always.
Sorry, more near to the microphone.
Third, the extreme short-termism and even denial that you see in many countries, you have to wait until COVID hit, even the leader were infected before actions was really. And fourth, a debate which is often not well posed between individual freedom and social responsibility. I think so these 4 areas show, how to say, are bad news: distrust versus science, distrust versus politician, short-termism, and this debate about individual freedom and social responsibility. And it's bad news because it shows that we were not able to deal with this during COVID, and this bodes bad for the fight against climate change.
So my question is about the European countries. In what sense, what model to resolve the question of COVID or not, and do better than the other countries and the other block of countries? For example, in some sense, the European countries have more vaccines, more vaccinated people, for example, also in relation with United States. In Italy, we are right to have 7%. I don't know in Polish whether it is the same.
No, it's 50 and not growing.
No,
it's not growing.
But also in Germany, we have a very good, and especially in Spain. In Spain, we have Madrid was really a model. So, of course, Latin America is a disaster. Argentina is a disaster. Brazil is another disaster. So Africa, we can speak because I think only 5% had the vaccination. So, so in some sense, the European country was better, the question of vaccination, with all the problems. I don't know. What is your impression? Please.
Well, Monsignore, I think that we rely too much on vaccination. There is something that comes before vaccination, that is prevention. On prevention, we have failed. And vaccination is a way of thinking that technology will solve the problem. We have a few scientists, they studied the vaccine, and they will give us the vaccine, and with the vaccine, we have the final solution, which is true to a certain extent. Because I think Yannis, excuse me, for Yanir told us one thing that is very important. We are going to have other similar pandemics because in the 14th century, at the time of Petrarca, in order to invest Europe, a pandemic that was born in China needed 30, 40 years. They went step by step. Today, in 30, 40 days, they may already be here. And so many pandemics that before were...
The China said they're born in Italy, no?
Yeah, well, maybe, in this case, from Italy to China. Before, many similar illnesses were born in a village and spread to a few villages around, but never acquired a world dimension. Now, everything immediately acquires a world dimension. So we are going to have others. Can we develop a system to prevent? And the system to prevent implies that we have a high level of community life. We must have communities, and we must have people who have confidence in their community. If they declare to their community, I have got this illness, they do not expect to be killed on the spot, to be isolated as a leper. They imagine that they will be helped. If you have not this confidence, you cannot track. And even if informatics gives you the instruments to track the people, they will not be used because people will be afraid of being tracked. And they will say, in the name of privacy, we don't want to be tracked. And so I think here there is here we fail.
Small community.
Here we fail. Chinese did not fail. Perhaps Chinese did not fail because they have not a feeling of individual liberty, perhaps. But in New Zealand, they have.
Yeah.
And they did not fail. So a compromise is possible. I think this is one of the first messages that we should deliver to the Europeans. It is possible to find a suitable point of encounter. I don't want to say compromise between individual freedom and the need of a prevention for the common good. So I think that on vaccines, yes, we won the battle and we are good. But on these other topics, we have a lot to learn, and I think this should be communicated. Since I have the floor, I wish to add one observation. We have lost another battle in Europe. It is the battle of communication. There is a movement. Thomas, you represent a movement. I must tell you, your movement and the movements like yours have lost a battle in communication because in Europe, because the dialectic was the governments say the words of science and good sense, and the grassroots movements were against, were irrational. We needed a large popular movement who was able to speak the words of reason to the people and at the same time to the government. It was an enormous occasion of protagonism that went lost. And I think that if you want to build up such a movement in Europe, you should also consider the institutional framework. I already quoted Section 12, Article 167 of the treatises. We do not have a European public opinion because of the difference of languages, and this makes our movement all too provincial, too self-centered, too self-referential, to use the language of Pope Francis. You should think something that can be proposed. You are willing to make proposals. One proposal, I think, should be on a European communication framework that helps to create a European public opinion, starting with the levels of the movements, the possibility of movements to talk to one another and to create a larger, broader European movement. I stop here.
Do you want to say something?
Just a follow-up to what Rocco just said. You are correct, I agree, but we should ask, why is that so? What is the cause?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah? Yes, that is the ultimate.
Look,
Let me
yesterday,
say
Angela Merkel said this. Angela Merkel said.
No, it seems to me that we are still a slave of a mentality according to which social order can be based on two pillars, state and market. That is the bipolar model of social order.
And religion.
And so in the case of the present pandemic, what should be done should be attributed either to the state, government, local or central government, never mind, or to the market. And it is obvious that unless we get rid of this archaic model social order and we move to the tripolar, state, market, and community, there is nothing to be done. Of course, people say, oh, but we have more, but they count nothing because I am reclaiming the recognition of community at the institutional level. I know that as a matter of fact, we have many movements, many associations, and many things. They sometimes they even do a lot of fuss, but they count nothing because the model, tripolar model, should be institutionalized. In the case of Italy, it's clear cut. All the management of the pandemic has been in the hands of the central government and regional governments. Civil society organizations, for instance, volunteer associations, they were kept aside. They were only asked to intervene post factum after the decision had been taken. So it is obvious that this is now, if you ask, why is that so? Of course, one major responsibility lies to the profession to which I myself belong, that of the economist. Because the economists are stubborn, they keep on teaching only about state and market, public goods and private goods. The market takes care of the private goods, the state of the public goods. But they forget about common goods. What about relational goods? Relational goods entered into a piece of economics only recently, etc. So that is why we should not only complain with what we observe, which is, but to ask at the highest level. In particular, Europe is trying to do that, but with minor force, because in Brussels and in whatever they meet, there is not enough intellectuals who are able to understand at this point. This is my opinion.
So a very quick comment and a question to Professor Barian, but really to all the speakers of the panel. So a comment or an encouragement to all the people representing different movements here. Our experience of talking to European leaders since of Europe a Patient, since the pandemic started, is very much what Professor Stefano Zamani has said. And the conference on the future of Europe, like I will put it very short, seems still like a PR thing because there's no institutional recognition of social society in this process of building Europe for the future. So perhaps an initiative of different actors to make this not a PR thing, but a real discussion with legal consequences on the future of Europe could be something that should be taken up as a next step from this table. And second, a question to Janir specifically, but all the panelists are very welcome to answer. Okay, we've heard that people are distrustful towards elites, scientific, political, economic. Why is that? And can we rebuild this trust, which is essential for fighting the pandemic, without what actually the president of Portugal said and quoted in your excellent paper, without investing in social infrastructure, like people just like, and how this could look like? By this, I mean that maybe this could mean provision of care and provision of additional income when economy needs to go to a halt. So this have not happened in Europe apart from help for business, not for citizens. And that's my open question. Is it not one of the reasons why in Europe, as research shows, citizens are extremely distrustful towards the institutions? And shouldn't we treat it really as a socio-economic crisis of trust, not only simply a problem with people being misinformed? Because there's a reason why people trust on information or don't. And I think this is one of the reasons. There are, of course, many others. So an open question, how can we help to rebuild this trust that has been really lost throughout this pandemic in Europe?
So I want to add something. So sister, please.
Please go ahead. You want to add something, or should I respond first? Yeah.
Maybe you should respond.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all,
brief, please, because
So first of all, I really appreciate the comments about the importance of community and social structure. I think it's super important to strengthen the institutions of the community, and to look to the mechanisms that have been done to do so, that have been successful in other parts of the world, but also to understand that Europe has unique community structures. Italy has very traditional, I'm not there, but I know from studies that Europe has a very strong community structure traditionally, and that could be tapped into in order to strengthen its ability to respond to pandemic. It is the mutual trust and mutual support of community members that is the most important foundation for addressing the major crises that we are facing. So this is number one. Number two, someone asked earlier about what about the next pandemic? And the answer has to be that we have to have a system of response. We don't say, you know, hey, what do we do about this fire? And what about the next fire? We have a system for dealing with fires. If we think about how that one works, it'll give us guidance to thinking about how we must deal with pandemics as well. It's the best system that we have that is most corresponding to the system, to the problem of pandemic response. And you wanted to add something, Marcelo, please do. But I think that the overall view has to be, if we recognize community, then we will be major step forward in addressing pandemics. Thank you.
Okay, Sister Helen.
Alexander?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting session. I wanted to say a very quick comment to Professor Yam, that it would be very interesting to me if some of those graphs that he was showing us at the beginning could be developed, connected with different measures of community, because things like levels of trust, you know, maybe connected with the happiness indexes, I don't know, different ways of measuring what could be proxies for community, which might show that areas that have higher, stronger community structures actually resisted better to the pandemic. That would be very interesting to see, because people here are suggesting that's correct, and that would be very interesting to see that. I just wanted to say two things. Firstly, you know, one of the main groups here is Europe a patient, and a big question about crisis in Europe. Of course, we're talking about pandemic, we're talking about climate crisis, that kind of thing. But I think we're also thinking about other kinds of crises in Europe. I think people have already said that. And I think it would be very interesting to think a little bit about this question of crisis. I mean, Gallagher already said this morning that it's got a positive side as well as negative side. I think when I think about Europe and how so often it's presented as a place that can't get itself together, you know, there's so many points of view and can't act and that kind of thing. I think it makes me think about Dominican order, for instance, you know, because
each time you put the example of Dominican order, I am very happy.
Because, you know, there is a sense in which if you are going to have the kind of openness to the diversity of positions that we have in Europe, the different cultural identities, and really let them speak and really allow this community of nations, there is going to be a cost. I mean, you put some benefit, you put some emphasis on that, and you take some of the cost of that. I mean, as a joke, I can tell you that we as Dominicans, we have loads of jokes about Jesuits, loads of jokes. They don't have any jokes about us. Why? Because they took our place. And we had to have jokes, you know, to make up for it, you know. But of course, they are they are a military structure, and they just go. And each Jesuit can go out on his own and do, in the sense of achieving a sort of global effect. They're much more effective than we are. But we have, I think, a really, really important advantage that because we have external religious symbols, and community life is important, you can be much freer in your mind. You know, St. Thomas says, you have to be obedient to your superior, but you don't have to agree with your superior. You can keep your own position, you know, and we have this very, very strong kind of sharing of ideas. And I think that's also a kind of reflecting a European approach as well. So I think to some extent, we, as the Americans say, you pays your money and you takes your choice. To some extent, we want to have a strong presence of different points of view around the table. It means that we are going to have some problem in having this sort of Chinese or US sort of action on the global level. And we represent a kind of another way of doing things alongside those other models. So I think the crises that we have to some extent are positive. You know, I'm sorry to say it in that sense, but I hope you can see what I'm getting at. The last thing I would like to say is that we talk about silent crises before, you know, the crises of underdevelopment and, you know, the kind of things to do with poverty that we were talking about a couple of days ago here, that this crisis is a loud crisis. It's forcing itself on us. So is climate. So, but the good thing about this is that they bring to the fore these silent ones which were there but were completely ignored before. So I think that that's a crucial thing. My last point is on the title of our session. From a culture of death to an imagination of mercy. I thought this was a really fantastic title when I read it, but we haven't talked about it in this session. And I was just wondering who was behind this title, whether we could say something about it, because it seems to me to be making some of the connections that Monsignor Sanchez Sorondo is pushing for, that, you know, we need to try and bridge the social and economic and political with the spiritual and religious. And mercy is one of the concepts that we could use. So that I was just looking at something that Stefano showed me in the Harvard of Human Flourishing on forgiveness. Now that all these studies they're doing on how forgiveness brings positive health effects, you know, so some kind of bridging concept. It seems to me mercy could be one of these. So I'd just be interested if anybody wants to say something about this title, whoever came up with it, or, you know, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I say a couple of quick thoughts? So first of all, the statement that you made about different organizational structures, this is fundamental in understanding complex systems. The different structures are good at different things. We don't say there's a trade-off between how the brain works and how the heart works. If each one is good at a different thing, and if they serve the purpose that they are good at, then we have a tremendous advantage in connecting them together in a shared effort. That's number one. Number two, there was a question that was asked before, and I didn't respond to it, about the role of increasing trust in science. And here also, science traditionally has a different structure than we're talking about its purpose that is now being used. Science is exploratory. It goes off in many, many different directions before it resolves in a particular direction, consistent with the ideas that you're talking about. There's a very, very important difference between science for policy and science as an endeavor by itself. In science for policy, you have to get it right. Lives are at stake, which is what we've seen. Science in general and scientist practice is an exploratory thing. You get something wrong, okay, we'll come back and correct it later. And that's how science normally works. So we really do have to rethink how science is interacting with policy and with society in the context of a crisis. And that requires a responsibility, the responsibility of scientists to recognize that they can do a lot of harm if they don't provide the right answers in the context of a crisis. Thank you.
There are other comments, please.
Yeah, maybe just a quick answer to Sister Helen. Yes, on the title, to sum up, what we are saying with denial of the existence of this crisis is culture of death. And if we want to get out of it, whether we are secular or religious, we need to widen our imagination, because that's the realistic thing to do. That will be one point to say. It's not, you know, like some kind of dream, like let's be nice or something. No, mercy is essential for good policies. Otherwise, we harm one another because, as Yanir said in scientific terms, and you can quote the Bible here, we really are members of one body.
I would add I'm sorry.
Please, Alexander,
I would add some things to.
some philosophical point. You're a philosopher.
No, I have to be careful. Okay, I want to add some things to Mateusz's remarks that now what we are seeing, the normalization of death on the grand scale. And as a citizen, I'm terrified what world look like after this normalization. Because you know, the responses in many countries are quite different. I am seeing in my district, in my city, the state of anomie. So I would say, yes, the crises are many times positive. So let's make this one crisis positive, because so yes, it's the first part. The second, I would say that we are seeing normalization of death, and we are seeing the instrumentalization of a grand scale. Excellence, Monsignor called it datization. I think it's the lack of the perspective of uti and frui, the the goals in itself, and I would connect it to the perspective of the Professor Pozzo, who spoke about it, and I think that we should connect this frame with the concrete economical and epidemiological solution. And we need to think about these concrete proposals through the glasses, as Mateusz said, of the imagination of mercy, and the glasses of the big notions as uti and frui. Okay, I'm sorry, it was quite messy, but I think it could stand.
So one word, the Jesuits were instrumental in the success of the Renaissance. That because the Ratio Studiorum prepared a tough encounter with the ancient. Sorry, philosophy. the Yes, mask is it's done. It's done. And second, supposed to understand. Copernicus was from Poland, so we expect a new Copernicus.
Okay. Look, we arrived. It's 1 moment, yes, but no more.
30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, so just a comment about the title. The title is the two words of the John Paul II. First, it is from the Evangelium Vitae. Of course, this culture of death. It's against the culture of life. And what shall we do if we begin killing each other?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be afraid of that. But then, in Novo Millennio Ineute, it's about imagination of mercy. And this is what's gonna be in the 21st century. And we thought it's like he couldn't prepare us for the 21st century COVID-19, but I think it's about the new way of solidarity, the lack of it, that brings us this title, why it's so important for us to look for this solution. That's all.
Very good. Do you want to say something? Sorry, Ellen.
Well, sorry, I don't want to take
refer to
time
you.
from the break, but I would say it's interesting also to me, this title, because it made me think about the talk which our Polish rector, who just finished in the Angelicum, gave on John Paul II's proposal to Europe. I'll ask him if I can share it with you, but it connects very much with this, and it connects these two ideas, especially the question of mercy. I was interested so it's very interesting what you tell me about that. Thank you very much.
Okay.